So what I was saying is that folks, which is actually I think really exciting for us because we want to have a dialogue. We're both kind of the emperor has no trying to think about innovative ways. These conversations, which can be generative, that y'all came into the space and the Invest Divest issue, and then we have an amazing group of they're doing on the ground that's really building a kind of around about that. So this panel is called Invest Divest, and the idea behind violence to incarceration and to the cyclic poverty inside of our communities. Comment that you can't mentor your way out of slavery, which I found really powerful. But I think we see over and over again that in this moment where we've seen unrest across the country, we've seen unprecedented, I think, at least for the last few decades, organizing happening in local communities. That people are looking for and seeking not small fixes and not band-aids, but system that's totally broken and are seeking transformation. And so I think lots of us who have been in this movement and before there was a quote unquote movement have been in this walk, is how can we get at these kind of systemic roots of white supremacy, of racism, of cyclic poverty that really allow us to engage in campaigns and then there were 5. So to kind of really get at the root issues. And so one of the frames that I think folks have been using is this Invest Divest frame. And the idea is that literally for the last 30 years and really since slavery, the U.S. government at the local, state, and national level has invested trillions of dollars annually, or trillions of dollars every decade, about $100 million annually in the incarceration, the caging, the surveillance, and the oppression of our communities through policing and mass incarceration. And there has, from that investment, grown an incredible industry that also has political power around ensuring the continued oppression of our people. And there's also, from that, the kind of the fruit that bore is mass incarceration and police violence. And so in this moment, when we're talking about police violence as an issue, there's a need, I think, not to just talk about body cameras or kind of Band-Aid fixes, and even, I think, arguably fixes that consolidate the power of the state, but how do we talk about transformational change? And so one of the ways that we've been thinking about that is in the investments that we make, right? So, like, this is kind of math, not magic. Like, where you put money is where you bear fruit. And so if we put money in incarceration for 30 years in the amount of hundreds of millions of dollars, of course we're going to have mass incarceration as a problem. And during the same time period, we've seen the divestment from educational spending, from the safety net, and from other spending that we actually know makes our communities stronger and safer. And so despite having kind of statistics that say, universal pre-K, for instance, reduces arrest rates by 70% before the age of 25. And we know that job programs out of Chicago for youth reduce arrest rates for reduces crime rates. Policing. And so this is a group of folks, and I think we think they're trying to what it is and what investments make our community less safe and violence. And so these are folks who are amazing on this panel who have been doing work in their communities that really seek different investments, that prioritize education and employment and support of communities instead of incarceration and caging of communities. And so I think in this kind of moment, as we think about what comes next and how to use the groundswell of energy, it feels really important to look at root causes and not just treat symptoms. And one of the root causes is around our budgets. And so thinking about our budgets as a reflection of our values, and then what is it, if not incarceration and not policing, that we want our budgets to have in them and that we want our values. On this frame, I think it's a frame that lots of folks use, but this panel are doing across the country. There are ways to connect our all incredible and inspirational to me, and I'm horrible with intros, and also I think everyone can read, and so I'm gonna and spearheading transformational for us to just introduce ourselves and say where you're from, since there's like
It's like, so. So yeah, my name is John Jordan. I actually work around historically black colleges and universities inside of an entity called Remix the Soul of Innovation. We do it across the country, mainly in the southeast is where but we're based in Atlanta right now.
My name is Katrina Conde. I'm from Mississippi State University, and we have a grant through Kellogg to work with Head Start parents to get young men of color ready for elementary school.
My name is Corey Anderson. I work at the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation in Little Rock, Arkansas, and we're a statewide foundation that focuses on a lot of things, but one of our primary pieces of work is around closing the gap between college campuses and communities on behalf of boys and men of color.
Paolo Gregory Harris, out of Baltimore. I work with the Ngoma Foundation, and we are modeling, uplifting communities of color through community development, physical development, and youth development, and trying to do it while bypassing the gentrification tide.
Montega Simmons, Organization for Black Struggle, St. Louis, Missouri. We do work on resistance front and transformation.
My name is Andrea Amici. I'm a policy analyst with the Center for Law and Social Policy. We're based out of Washington, D.C., and we're just really focused on creating policies that will connect low-income people, and especially people of color, to pathways to education in the workforce.
Foundations in building their cultural competency and working with the other identity-based affinity groups to move philanthropy to do their work more responsibly. But then we also work with our Native nonprofits in building allies, capacity building, technical assistance, and things of that nature.
Good morning, I'm Gina Womack, and I'm the Executive Director of Families and Friends of Louisiana's Incarcerated Children, and I'll get to share my spiel in a little bit.
Yeah, likewise. I'm Angela Walker. I am the Community Campaigns Director for Wisconsin Jobs Now in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And my primary fight is making sure that we have education justice and linking that to economic justice and achieving those things through direct action. We tear stuff up.
My name is Abraham Colunga. I'm with the Youth Justice Coalition. I'm a peace builder and one of the lead organizers, and I will also spill my spiel in a little bit. So.
And I'm Maud Bray. I'm with the Center for Popular Democracy. I'm the Deputy Director of Racial Justice and work with grassroots organizations across the country on policy reform. And at this point, I'm doing an Invest, Divest campaign in 8 different cities. And bam, back to Kim.
Oh, good morning, everybody. And good morning, I'm Carly Hare. I am the Coalition Director for the Joint Affinity Groups, and as Elaine spoke, Native American Philanthropy is one of 7 identity-based affinity groups that we work together to kind of influence, inform, and interfere with the philanthropic resources, and how can we create a more equitable framework for how funders partner with our communities.
We will get to that.
I like that. Interfere, that's cool. Well, my name is Kim, and I'm with the Youth Justice Coalition in Los Angeles. We're part of a lot of coalitions locally and statewide and national. So I want to give a lot of love to all the groups that came before us and continue to do the work in huge ways. The Youth Justice Coalition is formed by people who were incarcerated. We've been detained, deported. Some of us, some people have done time in state prison, some federal prison, some just county time. We have young people that have experienced the school to jail track, and then kind of at the other extreme end, people that have gotten life sentences and are now coming home to community. So we kind of, that's who leads the work for all of us, and we have a high school there too. Even our teachers, with the exception of one, have direct system, actually all of our teachers now have direct system experience, either their family members or they themselves. So we try to really make that a part of our leadership from the ground all the way up. We found obviously very early that LA County led the nation in incarceration. That was kind of like our first like question, why is that? And so we don't have too much time, but just wanted to walk to organize around the divestment in 4 areas. One is downsizing, make sure that we work very hard to close institutions and block the building of additional institutions. So right now there's a $3.5 billion jail expansion in LA County, and we have a coalition that we help to coordinate called the No More Jails Coalition, just to block any new expansion, as well as pushing hard for the closing of the juvenile camps. We have more juvenile probation camps than we do community colleges in our county, and we have the largest community jails and largest jail system in the world. So just trying to like close the institutions we do have. Second is diversion, pushing for community-based owned and operated alternatives to incarceration, detention, court, and arrest. We were successful in closing the juvenile court system, so now all juvenile tickets have been diverted. We were part of a campaign that ended truancy ticketing in LA City, but still don't have that ended in LA County. And we're trying to get, if we just took a quarter of the money that's being spent on the sheriffs to give fare evasion tickets on the trains and buses, that would give free metro passes for all students in LA County preschool through college. So we're just trying to like make those, part like weaving in money into our campaigns. And the next is data. Data has been very important for us. So data has not been transparent from the system, so we've tried to unearth it, expose it, steal it, and then get it out to the community. So that's a lot of the research. And then lastly, decriminalization. And so we've worked on decriminalizing truancy, like I mentioned. We worked on decriminalizing sex work for young people. We'd like to decriminalize all sex work, but we were part of an effort. It was just a weak effort. It still needs a lot of effort, a lot more work at the state level to get laws changed around that. And then to decriminalize all the so-called gang labels. So Abraham will talk more about a bill that we worked on around gang database, and we're trying to we just won the first audit ever of the statewide gang database because it's never in more than 30 years been looked at in terms of its cost, its impact, or anything. So we know that obviously all of this in LA County and beyond the nation is really about taking land. And so our war on gangs started in 1848 with the illegal annexation of Los Angeles as well as the whole Southwest from Mexico, a very new nation. And so when we looked at the data that we had to tell, history and going back in our history and learning the history we never learned at LA Unified School District was really important to us. We put out this report, it's one of the first reports, community-based research led by young people and people that have been incarcerated is like a big part of our work because we saw that researchers were taking our stories and even taking our analysis, our solutions, and then repackaging it in their own watered-down reports with no credit, sometimes not even pizza, definitely no money. And so we just felt like that, just having that happen to you over and over again just felt like straight rape of intellectual property. I don't want to use that term lightly either because I know many of us experience real sexual time, like creating our own research so that the story can get there in our own words and our own analysis. And this was one of the reports that the young people did. We looked at the fact that our police department at that time was Chief Bratton and our Mayor Villaraigosa. They were claiming that LA was the most under-policed big city in America. We kept trying to point out that they were comparing LA City to New York City, which was an unfair comparison population-wise. You have to compare LA County to New York City. But we could never get traction with media, would never pick it up and never run with it. So we worked with some of our young people, our youth leaders, went to every single city. There's 90 cities in LA County, 57 different police departments, police agencies in the county. We went to every single one and got their budgets. And where they weren't forthcoming with budgets, the young people learned how to put in Public Record Act requests and get the budgets. And then we were able to analyze all the budgets and found that, in fact, not only was LA City the most policed city, LA County the most policed region in the country, but also the highest paid. The other thing that happened with that was that in 2012, young people did a 50-mile march across LA County from the juvenile hall in Sylmar all the way to another juvenile prison that was in Norwalk and stopped at all the lockups as well as the communities along the way. And we surveyed, in two years, we surveyed over 1,000 people across that, which meant that we got all kind of demographics for LA County from very wealthy communities all the way to the most struggling communities financially. And we were able to, we gave everybody the same survey, which was they could have picked more police or more gang injunctions as solutions, but overwhelmingly people picked intervention workers, peace builders, youth centers, and youth jobs as the most important things to address violence in communities. So then we were able to compare like what we were getting around finances with what community solutions there were. And this is the kind of what the data unearthed from the report, the number of sworn personnel we had, what was being spent on law enforcement. That report, that cross-the-line report, you guys can get to if you want it. We were also able to prove that we had the highest paid personnel in the country. There was only one large city, San Jose, which had higher paid personnel. Everybody else was dwarfed in comparison to LA. And then we were able to show also how the majority of LA cities and LA County, as well as many of our other cities, the majority of the money was going to law enforcement. So while our addiction to incarceration and suppression was also bankrupting our ability to have parks and playgrounds and after-school programs, et cetera, et cetera. And so we also exposed poor outcomes as part of this effort. We were able to show how this $40 billion war on gangs that LA has initiated just in the most recent years, not the one that goes back all the way to 1848, but just the one that's more recent from like the 80s, how its outcomes were really horrible. And one of the things that really shocked us was when we looked at the homicide rates. What we found was that 1 out of 78,000 young men are victims of homicide in the west side of LA. That's like Santa Monica, Malibu, the Valley, et cetera. And there are some poor communities in that area, but it's largely much whiter and more middle class and wealthy. Whereas in the east side, it was 1 in, I think it was 7,600 or 6,100 on the east side. And then in South Central, Compton, Watts, where we're at, 1 in 2,000, a little over 2,000. So that was just shocking, I think, to people to see the difference in how even after a $40 billion so-called war on gangs, you have huge homicide rates that are, again, dwarfing other communities in LA, but also across California, across the nation. The communities that had the highest levels of suppression too, where you had like intensive gang injunctions, which are another phenomenon in LA that's spread nationwide now, had even higher homicide rates. And we have just recently put out new data, which I think I only had a couple copies of, but I could send to people, on police homicides. So last August, the young people in our organizers, we also looked at all the killings of people in LA County going all the way back to 2000. We were able to show how now we're at 630 people been killed by law enforcement in LA County since 2000. That's nearly 1 a week. Again, while our departments are saying they're like so reformed and so great, we were able to prove that they had by far the highest kill rates in the nation. And then we were also able to put out some other important things, like the fact that our departments, especially our LA County Sheriff's and LAPD, have the most integrated departments in the nation in terms of black and brown as well as women. We also have the highest death rates. So we also put out an analysis around blue being the new white, and that just much like in South Africa or anywhere else in the world, that just because you put people of color on the front lines doesn't mean you're going to have, if you don't change the culture of policing, a safer police department. And then there was a lot of other stuff too that got unearthed by that analysis that families who had lost loved ones as well as young people did. The other thing that, tell me when I've got enough. The other thing that was really helpful that we found was that young people were, constantly seen as the perpetrators of everything bad in LA. People really love that Kendrick Lamar song where he goes like, good kid, mad city. So we were able to flip that and say, let's look at what young people are really engaged in. Like, for example, this generation has the lowest violent crime rate of any generation since the 50s. So we were able to put that data out. Yet is getting locked up still, at huge rates. And we still have no downsizing of our juvenile halls, no downsizing of our probation camps, et cetera. And so we were able to put this data out too, which was really easy to find. What is LA County #1 in worldwide and nationwide that's harmful to young people? And why is the lens always on youth and families as the perpetrators of violence, as opposed to these things being the real causes, root causes of our violence? And there was incredible stuff for our county that I'm sure there'll be incredible stuff for your county. But some of the things that were really shocking to us was the fact that our ports are the third one of all 5 so-called illicit drugs, cocaine, heroin, come through LA, but that was never discussed in terms of maybe this is a problem for us. Obviously, we were able to unearth the fact that the CIA and LAPD work to put drugs in our communities, where that's, I'm sure they're the truth for across the country, but it's been proven now for LA, so that was really important data to get out. We have more white supremacy groups than any other part of the country. That was shocking to people. And the Aryan Brotherhood coming out of there, yet there's not a single gang injunction against any white neighborhood, even though we have just in LA City alone 82 neighborhoods on gang injunctions, which are really like martial law, like lockdown of entire neighborhoods. And the only 2 neighborhoods that have gang injunctions who are white are these surfer crews that are basically punking people for waves. So that was what they were criminalizing when you have like the Aryan Brotherhood running meth out of the whole North County, et cetera, or you know, all these white supremacy groups. The other thing was really important to us was to show how everyone was impacted, because we knew that in terms of the money side, we had to show how even our families, obviously, if you went like on my block, when I counted it up, it was like $1 billion block. If you looked at everybody on the neighborhood, starting with like the little restaurant on the side, the little hamburger spot on the front of my block, was a family that was Japanese-owned restaurant. When they were interned during World War II, they gave the restaurant to the black family that was working with them so that they wouldn't have to give it over to the government. So that was like a really interesting story when people started to go on their blocks and find out the impact. So we saw these $1 billion blocks, but then we're like, what happens to the communities or the families where they don't have anyone incarcerated? How are they impacted? So we just were able to show like what's happened. We started in 1980 with like 13 prisons, and then we started building. And this is again like tied to the fact that out of LA County comes Ronald Reagan and the war on drugs on steroids, Richard Nixon, and the law and order backlash and the original war on drugs, Howard Jarvis and the anti-tax movement and Proposition 13, all of that out of LA. So we also combine this with like Free LA and Save the World, or Bomb LA, Save the World. You know, just let us know if you're going to do the latter. And because we saw so many horrible policies. 3 Strikes wasn't written in LA, but it was written in Central Valley, but financed in LA. Prop 21, the harshest juvenile justice law in the nation's history, came out of LA. SWAT came out of LA. Militarized policing helicopters came out of LA. So we were just like trying to like expose that to people. And in all of that 25 years of the largest prison expansion in the history of the world, we only built 3 universities. 1 UC and then 2 Cal States also. So that really like woke people up. The young people even put out a map where California looked like a monster. It was really effective in terms of waking people up to that fact. Let me know too when I run out of time. Okay. We also showed how, again, like if you're a community that thinks you're not impacted, we were the first ones to like, and this is mostly young people, and those of us who were older also too, to see all of us as researchers, all of you guys members, all your groups as research groups, as advocacy groups, as litigators, and not to give up or forfeit that work to other people. Because I think that's been something that's really troubling to us, is that the only aspects of the movement that are funded anymore are the litigators, the advocacy, and the university researchers, and the ground is not getting any resources. So we've been trying to like, you know, expose that also. But we were able to show how California was #1 in prison spending by the end of this period, and had dropped to 47th to 50th in education spending, even though we were the richest state in the country, and some say the 5th, some say the 7th richest economy in the world. So this wasn't an issue of poverty. This was an issue of priorities and an addiction to incarceration. And then there's too much here to show, but I think another thing that was really important to us was to expose our history that we'd never learned. And again, every time we would go back a decade, we would find more foul stuff going back further. And that's how we were able to find that LA County really started as a war on gangs in 1848 with the annexation of the Southwest. So at that time, we had the highest lynching rate in the nation, all the way up until 1870s when Reconstruction took over and the creation of the Ku Klux Klan down south. And it was mostly a lynching of brown people who were trying to fight to reclaim their land. And what were they labeled? Bandits. That's your first gang label. In 1871, there was a Chinese massacre, which was a wiping out of Chinatown. Again, the gang label was used as the excuse. There was rival Tong factions that allegedly got into a shootout over a girl and accidentally killed a white man who was kind of like our Colonel Sanders. He was like they loved his chicken, and he was a chicken rancher. But what was the untold story was that he had bomb fried chicken, apparently. But the untold story was if you were downtown at that time, Native peoples had already been pushed off their land, even before when the Spanish were there, and were forced to live downtown, that almost all the gambling saloons and houses of prostitution and other like drug opium dens and stuff like that were owned either with law enforcement directly or by law enforcement money, which was a big part of our history. So we were able to like unearth that going all the way forward. And that Chinese massacre, 18 men were lynched and as many as 83 people killed, and Chinatown burned to the ground. So then we were able to take people on tours too and show them how we have a fake Chinatown that was rebuilt decades later with movie sets on the front of our building. So if you ever go to LA, you can see it really clearly. So all of this history, like, we were able to tie in for our county. This guy was like really crazy to us, like we had never heard of him. But this is one of our first LAPD chiefs that got national notoriety in the 30s. He set up a bum blockade, he called it that, on the Arizona border illegally, blocking people coming from Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma into California to work agriculture during the 30s, during the Dust Bowl. He said, all Okies need, this was his quote, is the 3 Bs, mass deportations out of LA, where they rounded up all Latinos, even if people had been living there prior to American conquest in the area, and deported them back to Mexico regardless of where they were from. So people hid in Big Bear Mountains to try to get away from Chief Davis. So this is, like, again, too much to go over, but I think all this history was really important for people to unearth, and not just it has been a big part of how we've argued for reinvestment, divestment, and even what we would call like reparations, that for those of us whose families have been impacted by incarceration, suppression, police violence, that money is owed to people, that trauma is owed. So one of the things we've done recently is start to advocate that victim support should be able to go to families who are allegedly gang involved, because they've been blocked from getting victim support even if your loved one's been killed, and that families whose loved ones are killed by law enforcement also deserve big victims assistance and burial expenses. They're even denied free counseling in those cases. Yeah, 2 minutes, okay. So I'm gonna kind of fly through the history to get to this next part. So again, I mentioned these were the 4 strategies we really used in this work. Focusing on data transparency, data collection. You guys have a sticker of a new bill that we're a part of with several other groups sponsoring at the state level that would require all law enforcement in the state to keep track of who they're stopping, why they're stopping them, and releasing that by age, gender, race. It also outlaws, for the first time, identity profiling, so LGBTQ, people with mental conditions, people that are houseless, because we are seeing, obviously, as you guys are in your jurisdictions, a lot of people being brutalized and killed that are in those conditions. And then I mentioned the other things. So I'm going to let Abraham talk to you guys in a minute about the 1% campaign that came out of that. But, yeah. It's both. It's blocking expansion to police budgets and trying to block expansion to the jail expansion that's proposed, but it's also talking about closing institutions and removing police. So we've been working very hard to get police out of schools. We're part of a Dignity in Schools campaign in LA, and National has also been working on that. We've also been working very hard to demilitarize police. We're a part of the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition that charts like the use of drones, surveillance technology, things like that around policing, but also been working very hard to get military technology out of our schools. Compton that have also bought and others automatic machine, getting them free from the federal government. Of course, we have like tanks coming to our school districts, really, like you guys do too, from the 1033 program that the federal government had, but they've We actually have a couple of school police departments that got 7 hours of training, so I want to give them credit. And they're also, I think, like we don't have a report on this yet, but we're trying to track how many people are former military, because obviously people are coming home with huge PTSD issues, and we think that's contributing to our high death rate in LA County. I mean, it's been to all of you as a model. The actions. One is, I mean, we do actions every week, and we've been trying to shut down the police commission regularly. A lot of us too are like allies or members, and those of us not are allies. And so we've been also doing a lot of work there to like expose police crime, do campouts in front of the police and mayor's office and stuff like that. But one of the actions that was really successful, I encouraged people to do, was a coffin action where we made a coffin for every single person killed since 2000, and we carried them down. There was about 1,000 people that came out that day. Resonated with them. It worked well with them. We've done Day of the Dead actions where people have gone into the police commission with calaveras, faces painted as skulls, And we were called terrorists and stuff, but again, like in terms of media attention, bringing media attention to these issues, very effective. And there's an action coming up on September 29th to take over the police commission and have an alternate people's commission on the sidewalk outside. Lastly, we also have gotten a lot of membership built up we show films now on the side of police headquarters. So they tried to shut us down also, but there wasn't a municipal code that they could use to do it. So we just project with a little projector, small, like about half the size of this. We're able to get like a walk-in movie theater that's like 50 feet by 30 feet on top of LAPD headquarters, about 30 feet up. And we showed Fruitvale Station and the bombing of MOVE headquarters and COINTELPRO films, and I mean just these really amazing films. And LAPD's just like there, so so I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Kim. Kim is ridiculous and inspiring. So I just want to kind of highlight 2 points. And there were some folks who came into the room, and we're having like a kumbaya moment here. So A, you're welcome to join the circle if y'all want to. And secondly, just introduce yourself real quick and say where you're from. So I'm looking at the new folks in the room, so I feel like, go ahead. And y'all are welcome to join the circle. You also welcome not to, but we'd love to have you if you want to join. There are open seats. So I'm going to pass it on real fast. So I want to kind of highlight 2 things that Kim said that I think are important. Number one is LA is not unique. So CPD is in the process of doing a budget analysis. Oh, he's taking notes. Introduce yourself, though. Do you want to join the circle now, or are you still feeling? Okay. You're welcome. It's an open circle. Yeah, come on up. I miss. Do you want to introduce yourself too? Linda Adams, where are you from? I'm from here in New Orleans. Okay, dope. So I'm going to pass this around again. We're just going to email addresses and polls. So the 2 things I wanted to highlight before we move on to the next panelist is number one, so LA is not unique. We've been doing a budget analysis of cities across the country. We're seeing that major cities from Chicago to Miami invest between 20 and 30% of their municipal budgets in the general fund to policing. So that's money, and this is like math, not magic, right? So that's money that should be going to preschool or childcare or education programs or job programs, and instead are funding policing and funding things like rocket launchers in our schools. So like craziness. On blast. And then number 2, I think this idea that budgets happen in the dark. And so this process of budgeting is actually an open process in every city. There's open hearings every year. It happens annually. But so much of that happens behind closed doors and folks don't engage with it. But there are opportunities and openings to engage. And so you have politicians, I think LA is an example, as is New York, talking about Black Lives Matter and in some ways co-opting the rhetoric. But in fact, like the idea of Black Lives Mattering can be expressed through a budget. Like if you actually care about Black lives, if you value Black lives, your budget reflects that. And so how do we call folks out on using rhetoric that undermines and co-ops, but in the actual process of creating budgets refuses to be about that and kind of put their money where their mouth is. So I just want to highlight those kind of 2 things. The budget process is an open process that happens annually in every city, county, and state, and can be intervened in. So I'm going to pass it on to Abraham, who does amazing work with Kim, and is going to talk a bit about their campaign.
All right, so my name is Abraham Kulunga. I've been in this fight for 1 year and 7 months, but prior to joining the organizing team with the YJC, I was addicted to guns and drugs, prison, the non-responsibility stuff of the organizing, right? So I was a big part of the problem, now I'm part of the solution. For me, it's my therapy, right? I took from the community, now I'm giving it back, and it took for me to lose my kids to get into this fight. Like I had a $15.75 an hour pay job that I gave up to do the organizing because I found a passion for it. And on top of that, because I had old behavior with the job that I had before, I decided, you know what, well, if I lost my kids towards my addiction and all this other stuff, I'm just going to fight the system. So along the way fighting the system, I run into Kim. And long story short, my sister is an alumni at the school that we have there. And she used to always tell me at one point in time, come talk to the youth, come talk to youth. And I'd be like, what am I going to teach them? How to get high? How to carry a gun? What do you want me to do? What do you want me to tell these kids? So I never showed up. And ironically, she comes into my life we start pushing forward. I started becoming a peace builder, organizing with them, and I just found a passion of just giving back in my continuing. So I've been sober for 1 year and 7 months. I got all my kids back. I'm off parole. I'm off probation. So I thank the YJC for that, for giving me an opportunity to give back, right? So one of the things being a pills builder was getting to know these at-risk youth, which I was once, because I started at 11 years old. There was nobody at that point in time that could tell me, intervention is going to work, this and that. It wasn't. There was no way in hell an adult's going to tell me I couldn't gangbang. There was no way in hell nobody could tell me that I cannot get high and rob somebody. There's no way. For me, giving back and working with these at-risk youth is just running my story, you know what I mean? So we have this campaign. We have 5 different campaigns. One that she mentioned is the STOP campaign that we work with families that have been affected by police violence. So we have a group meeting with them. We have the Family Bill of Rights that we're pushing for them, that this is all they want. You know what I mean? It's all about the families. And aside that, we have other coalitions that we do the logistics with. We have the War on Youth, which is the gang injunction stuff. I'm also on the gang injunction, which is my last fight. Because like I said, I'm off parole, I'm off probation. I have no DCFS case. I have nothing hanging over my head besides the gang injunction. And
you want to briefly explain the gang injunction?
Yeah, so the gang injunction is it's a how can I say it? So it's a way to sue a gang. You give them borderlines and you sue this identity. 9 times out of 10, these gang members are not going to go defend themselves in court when you give them this piece of paper. As for me, I got served in prison in 2006, and my mom was the one that signed for these papers while I was incarcerated because I did extra 90 days for refusing to sign because I didn't know what I was getting myself into. My gang packet was this thick. So when they had it to me and said, like, you're going to be served, I was like, I am not going to sign that. What is that? Well, I can't explain it to you. Just sign for it. I said, I'm not. Okay, well, you're going to fuck off your date. Excuse my language. So they kept me 90 days longer. My mom, come to find out, I called my mom and I said, I'm not getting out the day that they said it. And I had just done 11 years. So I said, I'm not going home on my day. They're giving me 90 extra days because I'm not willing to sign. She said, well, they dropped off a packet and I already signed for it. So when I got out, we had having a birthday party for one of my daughters. And come to find out, because she signed for that gang injunction, she's on the gang injunction also. And she's a school teacher. She has no criminal background, no nothing. And they pretty much made us pack up. They said, are you going to go to jail because you're around your mom? I had just got out. I was fresh out. My daughter was birthday party, and because they have it's a perimeter. So the city one is just Downey, HP, Southgate, that I cannot congregate in. And me mentoring, just by me sitting, get me arrested. And I look, and he's like, hey, can you tell my mom that's my neighbor? He says, oh, it's a way of the cities to oppress us, but actually, like, takes from us. Evicted, yeah.
In the destruction of to do that.
And it could just be by walking that, like, hey, you, and boom, it's for free. It's like, I didn't even do nothing. Go up. And they say that it could be 2-3 years before they have really chance of getting off. And 1%, of their budget, which equals 2,000 youth jobs, 250 youth centers like myself that does the intervention, that the police just. The difference between a peace builder is a FI card, identification way. Even they said if you're addicted, I was there. It fueled me who I was. I promised myself I wouldn't be, how do you say it? The right word? Gay. That I was a man, right? It all out, and it was somebody. All I had to do was just let somebody else know what had happened to me, and that I do more of the frontline, the mentoring, the giving back, running my story. I mean, all I can do is plant the seed. Even if you're not from nowhere, they already, like, just by who are you associated with, who are your cousins, or your cousins from somewhere, they automatically think that you're from there, so they label you off the top.
How many peace builders would you say you could hire with the 1%?
500.
Right.
500. Yeah.
Translation, I feel like New York had a beyond thought of, and we had the same kind of, like, you can hire. And so, like, looking at the ways that these funds, like, math, not magic, like, they actually translate into different investments that make more sense.
And one of the things that I love about the YJC also that made me give back to these at-risk youth was that we use transformative justice, right? They have RJ, but to me, I think RJ is more like a stopper. It's more like a follow-up because It's like the Bloods and Crips, right? How can you restore peace when there was never peace to begin with, right? So if you transform the peace within that community, then you could restore something that you actually implemented. So that's one of the practices that we use, and we have a more successful rate there than we do calling the police. Hey, we have somebody addicted to drugs. We have this guy carrying a weapon. It is a weapon-free space, so I get to intervene and talk to him like, hey, look, all you got to do is just have a circle. Let's talk about this. We're not going to kick you out. We're not going to send you to the streets just because you're high. What we can make you do is community service within the building, clean the restrooms, knock your high off. We talk about it. It's one of those things that I love because of the TJ process. To me, it was unheard of. All I knew was violence. All I knew was like, oh, they're going to call the cops, I'm gone. You know what I mean? And now that the TJ process gets implemented, it's like, we sit down and just powwow pretty much, you know? Let's figure things out, do the follow-up, which would be the RJ. So thank you.
I might decide to intervene because I'm like having bouts of inspiration and y'all amazing. But this idea of building institutions and thinking about safety beyond policing. So how do we deal? I mean, all communities are deeply, deeply traumatized, right? And I think we've seen that like using violence and kind of the blunt force of the state doesn't work, but like we need to think about what does work. And so this idea of building alternative institutions and ways to deal with our communities while also thinking about ending state violence against them, I think is a really powerful intersection that I just wanted to elevate. And now Angela Walker, who's from Wisconsin and out of Milwaukee, doing amazing work.
Wisconsin. I apologized for Scott Walker yesterday, so I'll extend that to the larger group. I apologize that he is a thing for everyone else other than us. That was never supposed to happen. My name is Angela Walker. I have like this awesome title, but really I'm an organizer, and I'm a team of one for Wisconsin Jobs Now in our community campaigns program. Primarily is education justice. And that for us is fighting the privatization of our public schools. And Kim mentioned about budgets being done in the middle of the night. Wisconsin's legislature are pros at this. They folded this measure into our state budget and passed it in the middle of the night. So it is a fact that, and it's modeled on the same type of state takeovers that are happening in other states, particularly throughout the South, things that have happened on the East Coast, where you have this 3 to 5 schools are under our provision. I think the county executive has agreed to appoint a commissioner who will decide, you're supposed to hand over all of the information, assets, land, everything that's in the school to the state. So it's our job. We have sent a message to the state as an organization as part of a coalition, Schools and Communities United, where we have told the state, you can legislate whatever you like, see if you get it. So I'm looking at an arrest in my future coming up. I'm here for it. I am a public school graduate. I am a public school grandparent. I am a firm believer that, full disclosure, I ran for sheriff of Milwaukee County last November as a socialist and entered race, gender, and class as the cornerstones of my, obviously I didn't win. If anyone has my people, I apologize for him too. I tried. But which what the root causes of poverty particularly. I live in intentional defunding that happens in Wisconsin. Where I live, there are gunshots every night. Where I live, I come home to places taped up every night. So this is not some abstract concept. When we're talking about mass incarceration, this is what I'm surrounded by. These are people that are very, very close to me. My guy is on paper. So, this is not something that happens, and folks don't realize, if you're outside of the work that we do, according to the Annie Casey Foundation, Milwaukee is the worst place in the country to raise a black child. Milwaukee is the worst place in the country to be a black person, which Wisconsin is the worst state in the country for black people. We are in a very bad place. wouldn't call it swag. One of those things is 15 whoop, because it needs to happen. But also, my pieces of it are, what are safe neighborhoods? What constitutes digging at the root causes of poverty where we are, and naming those things. Let's call out capitalism for what it is. Let's start at the top, and let folks know that, you know, the commodification of black and brown in rural Wisconsin are happening, and what they're allowing to happen, so that they understand that I do for black under the Black Lives Matter banner. So what we're talking about is not only raising wages for families. I don't care if you sell your tail on North Avenue, you deserve $15 an hour in a union rep. The politicians to have this. So we're talking about community schools model, because our communities need healing. We do a lot of talk about community, but we have to question whether we really even have one. We don't know each other. And I've been grateful here with all of the intergenerational conversations, because those are things I need to be able to have at home. And saying that building community, we have to be honest with one another. We have to remove the stigmas and the silos that we put our own people in. And the gender biases, and the I don't deal with my LGBTQIA family and all of this other foolishness. We have to be honest with one another and start to truly build community and decide what the health of those communities is going to be. So the community schools model makes public schools, keeps them public, but also reinvests and puts services in those school buildings that members of the community, not just students and their families, can access. If you have an issue in your community where you're dealing with, like, there's a food issue, it's a food desert, things like that, you can go into that school and get that kind of help. Those types of resources that make the school a very living part of that community. That is the model that we're pushing. So it isn't about we're constantly saying what we don't want, we're saying what we do want. And we're also saying, which I said when I was campaigning, legalize and decriminalize marijuana. It's time. And also make reparations with that by letting people, attaching a provision to that so that folks who are currently serving nonviolent marijuana offense sentences, let them go. What type of money could we realize? And our figure in Wisconsin was $167 million a year, not counting taxes from people who are vending and growing. What could you do with that kind of money? I could think of a few things. We have some of the worst roads in the nation. Can we do something about our potholes? But, I mean, when we're talking about making, man, the struggle is real. But when we're talking, and I come from transit, but when we're talking about making those connections and making those bridges with the concept of, if you divest it from state-sponsored violence, because let's call this what it is, that's exactly what it is, and it isn't necessarily always police violence. Gentrification is state violence. Lack of access to health care is state violence. Lack of public schools and moving kids out of their neighborhoods. We just had a voucher school that folded 9 days into the school year. All of those families have no idea where they're going to send their kids. And as much as I would like to sit back and tell you, I told y'all this was going to happen, I can't do that, because it's not a space to be petty. But we told them. So things like that. Those things are state-sponsored violence. So one of the things that we focus on is community education, popular education, political education, getting people to know what the demon is out here. If you name what's happening to you, then you can do something about it. But you have to know what it is first. And a lot of our people don't, because the only time someone knocks on their door with a little clipboard is when it's an election year. They need your vote, and then you never see them again. So what we have in the back is that Freedom Compact, which weaves together the education justice pieces, the economic justice pieces, and also the fact that coming up for 2016, we want to be able to push politicians that if you do not support living wage, you do not support decriminalization and legalization, you do not support the community schools model, keep public things public, you ain't getting elected. And being that the folks on the ground are pushing that dialogue. And it's time for people, at least where I am, just encourage, and it's very hard because people are very depressed, but getting them to step into their power and realize that stuff don't move if you don't want it to move. And you can't be afraid to shut stuff down. So we're about direct action, we're about direct education, and that's what I do.
Good morning. Again, my name is Gina Womack, and I'm the Executive Director of Families and Friends of Louisiana's Incarcerated Children. And so we are a multi-generational membership-based organization, and we have been fighting for years to close prisons, build communities, and keep children in school. And so our work began back in 2000 when Louisiana incarcerated over 2,000 children. We were spending over $60,000 per child to lock up a kid, less than about $8,000 per child to do education. And with the help of other allies, we were a part of another organization that we spun off from. We filed a lawsuit. We developed the whole campaign around Close Tallulah, and we were successful in shutting down the country's worst juvenile prison and ushering in juvenile justice reform work. And since calling an act, having an act passed, Juvenile Justice Reform Act of 2003. So our work has been since that time to get full implementation of this particular law, which we find that our state is just really have attention deficit, and we just can't seem to get them to stay focused on what they were really trying to do, right? And so we're fast forward to where we are at this point, and we still have children who are being suspended from school, children who are being locked up in prison for nonviolent offenses, although the number has decreased to like 400 children, but still 40% of them are there for nonviolent offenses. And so when we spoke with parents and understood that lots of the kids were entering the prison system from the school system through zero tolerance policies, part of the Juvenile Justice Reform Act provided for a provision that had a juvenile education piece connected. And so it's just, again, still really interesting to try to get us to get full implementation in Louisiana. So I'm just going to go really quickly around the work. And so what other folks have been talking about, like we've been really trying to stay focused on keeping the lawmakers who come in and out, and they don't all have the same best interests of our kids at heart. And so we've been working to produce a report around how the harsh education policies push the children into the prison system. We have been looking at and actually won bipartisan support back in 2011 around changing our student discipline code. Unfortunately, our governor had a different idea and that law was vetoed. But we still continue to organize our families, do leadership development, ensure that they have seats at the table where family members can actually give their input about how the incarceration and how school pushouts really impact their families. Again, I heard Kim say earlier about data, how hard it is to get. It's equally hard in Louisiana. So, and even if you get the data, you don't really trust it because it's not really showing what our parents and our families are really talking about. It's not showing and talking about how kids are actually pushed out of school, how they're counseled out, how they're made to go to or leave their schools because of if they're not meeting the test scores, which seems to be the deal of the day. And privatization, although when we passed the Juvenile Justice Act, we also had talked about how okay, see the little note made me lose. I was trying not to, but it's funny. I know I do it all the time as well. But Anyways, yeah, so really trying to ensure that the families can actually have their voices heard around the data and around what's happening, but definitely around privatization. So we did in private, well, sort of on the surface, privatization of the prisons for juveniles. But they're still privatized because we know we still have to pay for the phone calls. You still have to, I mean, the services inside are still privatized. So they try to say we don't have private prisons, whereas the corporations may not be making actual profit off the actual prison. They're still making lots of profit off of what's going on. But we obviously have we're really on top of privatization, since you guys probably know that New Orleans is now the privatized school system, although it's public, so they say they're using public money, but they have privatized policies in the charter school systems and the voucher systems as well. And I know, and I've been saying the same thing, and I don't want to be the person to say I told you so when they have to take the money out of the voucher systems and those families, like what's going to really happen to them, but also about the charter stuff. And families been fighting around that for a long time. But what's happening is that, if a charter school is not being on top, they can close their charter at any time. And that leaves families, and that just happened to 2 schools this last school year, and that leaves families completely in the dark. So we've launched what we call a people's data campaign, because we want our families to be able to share their own individual stories, because when you have over 15,000 children being suspended for willful disobedience, which is really ludicrous, and you have zero tolerance schools and you have no excuses schools for children, you can clearly see that we're not a state that's interested in really caring for our kids. And along with our People's Data campaign, we launched an overall frame of a campaign called Let Kids Be Kids, and hopefully you guys will be seeing a lot more of that, because we're hoping that we can elicit other folks to really join in, because when you're creating laws that criminalizes youthful behavior, when you're having zero tolerance policies, which is contradictory to children, when you're suspending them for being willfully disobedient, which is what every child is really good at. And when we stop looking at the whole child and helping as adults to really develop them holistically, and we're just concerned about test scores like something is extremely wrong. And so our little logo on the back, the Let Kids Be Kids campaign, is really about making us stop and think as adults. It's our duty to care for kids, even if they're willful, right? And locking them in prison isn't the way that we should be caring for them, because if we believe that children are our future, all children, then we should be caring for them equally across the board. And so lastly, we had an opportunity to participate with a national cohort of folks, about 20 organizations, to really look at who pays the true cost of incarceration on families. And so families had an opportunity to really talk about, when you lock up a child or a family member, how that impacts the entire family, which can really kind of go with our logo. If you see, there's the person and the little, child, and you can't really tell who's in or out of prison. And that's because basically the entire family is incarcerated. And we really should be thinking about that. And you talked about, and you all guys talked about how the whole family, if, maybe get kicks out of a house, and how are we expecting that economically our families are going to really be able to participate. You guys can check out the report online. It's whopaysreport.org, and you hear how our families are talking about they really can't support and talk to their loved ones on the phone because it costs $5 or whatever a minute, and how much it costs. One of our reasons for doing the juvenile reform was also about regionalization and trying to get kids close in their community, because if keeping families a part of a child's time away from home really speeds up and helps for the rehabilitative process, but they can't do that if they're hundreds of miles away from home, and what that costs to the different family members to try to go and see a child that's locked in prison, and what it costs if you take the money from the household and you have to pay it to the system to house your child, how that really impacts. And so there's just lots of great information in the report. There's lots of different things that you guys can look at in regards to our Reform Act, Juvenile Justice Reform Act 1225 of 2003. But unfortunately, it's really hard to get the systems folks to stay focused on implementation. And for us in our organization, it's really about, we don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. We constantly take people back. If we follow this trajectory, it's going to actually cause, and how cheaper it is to put children into community-based alternative programs and utilize restorative practices, but the system is really hell-bent on not doing that. So our job is really to hold them accountable, because they continually hold our families and our youth, those are the most vulnerable people, accountable. And so we have to organize and rise up and say, no, not no more, because this is how you're impacting our families and our community. Thank you.
I could sit here and listen forever. So I wanted to just make sure that we could have a conversation among all of us. We have about 12 minutes. I'm going to say it's more like 15 because, but I'd love to kind of talk about if folks have questions or thoughts or ideas, kind of have a space for us to discuss that. So does anyone have thoughts, ideas? Go ahead, do it.
All right, cool. So Melissa Harris Perry, right at the 1-year anniversary of Ferguson, right? The alderman from that county or from that area jumped on Melissa Harris Perry and was talking about, they did a DOJ report looking at from policing, right? So if you look at and read the revenue for the actual, it's like, what could they do if with the revenue growths from the people just with marijuana nonviolent offenses alone, and you all kind of like cost that out. And then it was the reason I'm asking this, and you as well, the data piece. I mean, you said that, and as you were saying, is like even being on the streets, it will work, right? And how do you get those funding to that type of work? Data is a huge part of that. And so what I'm wanting to figure out is, how do you hold your stories and actually search that? And then inside of the data, and also capturing, what is the process you all have taken in capturing what the history is in that place, and then the data around that? Like, how do you hold that information? And just talk about the process of getting it as well.
Well, I'll talk about the most recent report, which again, we can get you the copy of the report, or you can get it on our website also, as well as I'll give you the more updated data. But it started with families telling their own stories. So we started getting, first of all, our own membership has been really devastated. So we've buried 57 people now. As of yesterday, 59 people in 4 years. Due to police violence and community violence, although we say community violence is also state violence, because they could solve community violence tomorrow if they wanted to, and they have in other places in the world. And if, like I said, if 1 out of 2,000 youth was dying in white communities, there would have already been a national campaign to eradicate gun violence in our neighborhoods, obviously. So because of that, we started to hear stories from our own family members around police violence, and we just started keeping a list of all of those stories, and we noticed that the media wasn't covering the stories. So then we got very alarmed that probably a lot of people are dying that no one knows about, and especially with 57 police agencies. So then we started going to the police agencies. We asked them to reveal what their use of force data was. And even though some of them had consent decrees, they weren't releasing the data and refused to release it to us, which is against the law in California. At least we have a Public Record Act request law in California, which is kind of like national FOIA at the state level. But they were still violating the law. They continue to violate the law. So what we did then is we went to the coroner's office, because we said, who keeps the most accurate data on deaths? It's very hard to cover up a death. We know we don't have accurate data on the beatings, And the sheriff's department was also, there was a lot of folks that were coming home from jails too, and we're talking about the beatings inside the sheriff's department, inside the jails. So we started to keep track of those, but we still didn't have an accurate number. But on the deaths from the coroner's office, we got an accurate number. So now what we're trying to do is we aligned the data we got from the coroner with our stories from our families. And that's what became the report for the police violence. I think there's other ways that data was really helpful to us on the school front. We were able to show that there was more probation officers and police officers in our schools than guidance counselors. And the National Guidance Counselor Association was really helpful in getting us the data around guidance counselors. So we were able to show that in California, for example, is the lowest, we're 50 in the nation, 51 because they count DC also. It was 1 student to every 1,016 counselors. But meanwhile, we had constant contact with police and probation. And so that was really helpful in this recent, just this month too. We were able to expose that the sheriff's department the probation department had $22 million they were supposed to give out to community groups to do alternatives to incarceration for young people, but they had sat on the money. And they've been doing that regularly also. We get all the reentry money that comes to LA County gets spent by law enforcement. And so what the probation department decided to do now that the money's been exposed is that they want to send probation officers into the junior high schools to act as prevention workers. So that's another new campaign that has to be jump started. But and it's never ending, right? But I think it's really successful. Yeah.
And I mean, even for us, like I think when we first started working with the other organization, like they had a lawsuit and we tried to pass some legislation and it wasn't really happening, right? But so it became very apparent that when the story, so bringing our family members to actually share their stories made a huge difference, because all of a sudden these weren't some people that you could ignore. You'd have to actually put a face to it, and these were real people, and they had real kids, and they had real hopes and dreams for their children, and they weren't these like monsters and that they had made them out to be. And so from that, it became very obvious that humanizing the situation was really, really necessary. And so basically, we do our stuff grassrootsy, and you get the data. It's on the websites for the school system, or what's really interesting, we noticed that basically the more you fight, the less data that they'll put. So our Office of Juvenile Justice used to have lots of data on the website, but not so much anymore. And as well as the school system, right? They had all the suspension stuff, and then it was like, oh, you're using the data against us, so we're not going to put it there anymore. And so it went away, and then this whole Katrina stuff came back, and we were putting together our own website around what really was happening around Katrina. And then so all of a sudden the school system started putting a little bit more, and they wanted to really showcase it, but we still know it's not really real. And so if you hear one story, then you know that somewhere along the line it's going to continue happening. And so our families go out and talk to other families, or our kids are talking to other kids to collect the data, because it's just easier, and people will tell their story to another person, a peer person, to and if there's a space. And so we released a report in 2010 around harsh discipline in New Orleans that led to a whole bunch of other things. And then you'll also see other people will release and try to do counter reports. But for us, it's really, really important. And it's part of our organizing pieces too, that people can tell their stories and see the outcome of what's really going to happen and stay really, really connected to the work. So it's just kind of on the ground, door knocking, whenever we do outreach tabling, and we'll gather, and it's our families that put together the instruments, because they know what story they really want to be able to tell. So I hope that answered. Okay.
So I love the creativity and just the way you all are going at your work. And I would love to know, because it's such a maze, and it's so thick. It's like such a thick web. It's really hard to feel like you are making an impact on this thing. So I guess there's leverage points sometimes where you can stick an acupuncture needle and things start you see some shifting happening. What have been your most powerful leverage points, even if they were small shifts, just to where you see things shifting?
Mine is a little similarly combined, but I think in this work, we don't do enough of celebration of when we have the wins. How do you in your institution celebrate, whether they're micro or macro wins? And how do you communicate that with the community so they know the impact of what they're doing and what you're doing collectively?
Do you want to take one more, maybe? Does anyone else have a question, or we could? Oh, that's enough.
So for me, right, not knowing that we could legislate and we could lobby, going to Sacramento for me was very powerful because and then coming back and sharing that story with the students and showing appreciation for what we've done. You show appreciation, the work comes 10 times double. We have co-sponsors, so just doing it when you see them and good work, good. It's just showing a sign of appreciation works for me in our org. So that's one of the things.
I think for the first question, one of the things that immediately in Milwaukee where some youth were concerned about being moved out of their school in favor of having another school moved into their school. And these are primarily immigrant youth. It was dope. We organized them or let them organize themselves. I rode the city bus with them to go, and they held up little signs that they had drawn themselves that said, "We need to be heard," and prompted not only the superintendent but the top brass for their school district to come down and actually have to talk to them, and to see them step into that power and realize and remind them, this didn't happen because I did it. It happened because you did it. And if y'all keep pushing, you are the ones that will make them listen to you. My job is to follow you. That was one of the dopest things I've ever seen. And to the second question, just tell folks about it and remind people, because this work is dark and it's hard, and we get our ass handed to us on a regular basis. And just reminding, I guess, in our networks, care for each other and take care of each other, and also with our communities, and letting them know this ain't gonna be an overnight thing, but we gonna get there. It ain't gonna be this year. My grandkids may be the ones that see this. It may not be me, but we're in it for the long haul. And when we get little wins, we talk about it and get ready for the next one.
So for us, it's really exciting. So our Flick shirt has gotten us fame at the state capitol, right? And so it would be so annoying to the legislators, people. They'd be like, "Here come those red shirts," right? And so and so you're right. Like, it's really, really hard, and some days it's just really, really depressing. But for me, like, when our they know that they're, like, we never say we give family a voice, right? We just provide an access for people to lift their voice. And so I always love telling the story of Mr. Johnson, who works in our office. He is just so crazy amazing. And so he will say, he's like, I have this power and I'm not giving it back, right? And so no matter what the people, the lawmakers do, it's like when families realize that it's about them and it's about their families and they're going to fight for it. And so I love when we go to the Capitol, and it's just really fun being Flick, right? It's like the other allied groups, they can't say stuff. We can just say and do whatever we want, right? And so when we go to the Capitol, we went with some of our allies, and they were kind of sitting there, and Mr. Johnson he was like, okay, he was getting his troops together. He was like, when we walk through the Capitol, because some of our family members were new, he was like, this is our Capitol. And you walk, he stood up straight and made everybody pull out, their shoulders back, and you take that space and don't you move. We just walk in through and don't move, and make everybody go around, and then we'll do that, and they'll have to part, and people have to go around us, which is really, really cool. And I love it. So it's those things when we know that they're about to kill our bill, and we'll do whatever we want to do, hold up the signs and, just start mess and just do those things. And we didn't do the best job of lifting ourselves up in certain, regards, but we've learned to do that. So I know now that to Act 1225, like we have a family member with a flick shirt on at the signing of the legislation. So when other people try to claim our work, it's like, you know what? Hello, we were standing there. So anything about the families being there, and they want to steal the space. And it took a while, but I'm like, we're all about, this is our work. You know, you can come with us, but you're not going to make us take the back seat of the bus, right? And so it's like, we have to claim that space because it's about our families, it's about our kids. I'm going to say our kids. No, it's our kids. And so we don't have to follow you, right? You might have all the money, you might have all the glossy stuff, but we've been working on being all of that. We've been grassroots. We're going to get our glossy. And if we have to push you backwards to get you to understand you need to, we can work together, but we're not going to follow you. This is not happening. I think that is just been really exciting and very much powerful to realize and take our space.
Okay, so it is 11:30. I'm going to do 2 quick reminders, and then for folks who are down to stay for a few more minutes, kind of have a closing exercise. So number 1, there is glossy grassroots swag in the back. Check it out. We also have a yellow pad that I don't see right now, but I'm going to find. If you haven't already, If you haven't already like put your name on that pad, please do so. I'm gonna do a follow-up email, and for folks who want to be on these amazing organization listservs and like be updated on like what they're doing, I'll like let you all opt into that and give information to them. And then lastly, I think, and this was actually Kim's brilliant idea, but we talk a lot about the struggles that we are engaged in, and we're kind of constantly on the defensive, I think, in the work that we do. And so I wanted to kind of close out with a question of everyone in one sentence. Say, if we're working towards a vision of abolition where we're not spending $1 million on every block to put people in cages, what would you use for your personal block that money for? So if we're reimagining our future, like how do we actively engage in that process? And so I just want to go around real quickly and have everybody in a sentence or a clause and a sentence, kind of articulate what their vision of how we should be reinvesting in all communities. And I think in all blocks, right? Because these are all